Of course, also all the young people joining us from UNESCO Caribbean Youth Network on Climate Change, and the representatives of ministries and young people. So also very warm welcome. I see there are a lot of Secretaries General of Caribbean National Commissions for UNESCO. I also see other participants from UN sister agencies are on, members from embassies, our colleagues from Paris, and especially those joining us
Hello?
I think we lost you, Juliana.
Okay.
areas for enhanced cooperation between social scientists, civil society and policymaking for the new. We will be looking especially at socio-environmental resilience and youth perspectives on tourism. In terms of technicalities, since we are broadcasting this, I would encourage you, if you have any questions, that you could use the Q&A function where the moderators and the panelists can see the questions. So we would encourage you to use that in order to have an interactive session. Now I would like to give the floor to Ms. Catherine Grigsby, the Director and Representative of the UNESCO Cluster Office for the Caribbean, for giving official remarks. Director, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Juliana. Thanks a lot. Dear Secretaries General of the National Commission for UNESCO in the Caribbean, distinguished panelists, dear partners, CARICOM, UE, ODI, dear guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Let me start by thanking you for joining us on our journey to imagine and rethink the future in Caribbean small island developing states today. I could not stress enough how the COVID-19 situation has upended lives, disrupted our education systems and public services, while putting a strain on the livelihoods of many people in the Caribbean and across the world. However, despite much hardship suffered, our societies have also demonstrated the capacity to adapt and show solidarity. Teachers, parents, health workers, entrepreneurs, journalists, creative professionals, and youth, among others, while being physically distanced, have found innovative ways to address societal ills and join forces to deliver solutions to some of the challenges resulting from the virus. This has served as a reminder that each crisis is an opportunity to readjust and collectively rethink, to envision and enhance. As intellectual agency of the United Nations, UNESCO endeavors to be a driver of this reflection process. As global laboratory of ideas, we hope to bring together researchers, youth, activists, and policymakers to reflect on what the virus has revealed about the nature of our societies and to embark on a dialogue about how we can build back better while ensuring that we do not lose sight of our goals established by Agenda 2030. Today, we want to make use of this opportunity, and with this timely event, we have placed the focus on Caribbean small island developing states. As you may know, small island developing states have been recognized as a special case for development, given their unique vulnerabilities. With a contribution of less than 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions, seas have been projected to be hardest hit by the effects of climate change. Also, the Caribbean is the world's second most hazard-prone area if we measure the cost of natural hazards in relation to the size of the national economies. Despite these special vulnerabilities, the majority of Caribbean seas are categorized as middle-income countries which restricts their access to bilateral and multilateral grants. For UNESCO at the global level, SIDS have been long recognized as a priority group. In line with the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres' recent call for a big push for sustainability in Latin America and the Caribbean, today we will discuss the main ingredients for building more resilient societies to external shocks. In the policy brief that he released yesterday on the impact of COVID-19 on Latin America and the Caribbean, the Secretary General asserts that recovery from the pandemic should be an occasion to transform the development model of the region, and it also demands strengthening democratic governance, human rights protection, and the rule of law in line with the 2030 agenda. As Secretary General Guterres emphasizes, building back better needs to be anchored in equality and participatory approaches. In this regard, I would like to highlight UNESCO's role in giving the floor to young people. Today, for our second session, we have invited young people from across the region to share their visions, ideas, and hopes for the future of tourism, a critical sector for the Caribbean, which has strongly been hit by the pandemic. Likewise, UNESCO has much to contribute to partnership at the intersection of tourism, Caribbean creative industries, and sustainable development. This is also a good moment to mention that in addition to the English and Dutch-speaking Caribbean, we are very pleased to welcome panelists that join us from Cuba today. In concluding, I trust that the outcomes of this event today will not only feed into a discussion on how we can best serve our SIDS member states, but will spark new ideas and serve as fertile ground for new partnerships in the sub-region. I hope for a productive discussion. I thank you. Over.
Thank you, Director, also especially for highlighting why SIDS are recognized by the international community as a special case for development. I wish to move to the first session now, building resilience in the post-COVID-19 Caribbean, what's next? And for that, I have the honor of welcoming our moderator for this session. Our moderator is Professor Michelle Maiku. She's a professor of urban and regional planning at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine in Trinidad and Tobago. And Professor Maiku serves on several advisory bodies, including the Scientific Advisory Committee of UNESCO's Management for Social Transformation Program, and also on the United Nations Habitat University Partnership Initiative. She's a coordinating lead author for the working group #2 of the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change 6th Assessment Report, and on the chapter on small islands. She has numerous publications on the socio-economic transformation of Caribbean small island developing state. Welcome, Professor Maiku, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Juliana. Thank you. It is my pleasure to participate and to moderate this session this morning. And I am hoping it's going to be a very animated discussion and a highly productive session amongst our very distinguished panelists, as well as the stakeholders who have joined the session this morning. Just by way of introducing the session, I think at no other time in our history have we been faced by a pandemic of this nature for those of us of this generation, and certainly the economic fallout that has followed from the COVID-19 pandemic. The experience, however, provides us with both challenges, but also opportunities for transformation. And I think certainly as Caribbean SIDS, we have a well-documented history of finding new pathways to transform our societies, even in the face of resilience. And we have had that experience in terms of coping both with natural hazards and socio-economic vulnerabilities. So I think this session certainly brings us to a place at a crossroads where we can put our minds, our collective minds together in terms of forging a pathway for better, building back better, and developing and promoting the socio-economic and environmental resilience of Caribbean SIDS. I therefore want to move specifically to the objectives of this session. And the first objective is to identify examples of how COVID-19 has impacted on Caribbean SIDS and whether that has has impacted on keeping us on track to achieve the UN SDGs and moving towards Agenda 2030. The other objective is to shed light on the multidisciplinary strategies for building back better and working towards a sort of multi-layered lens using both national, local, and international perspectives. And the third objective is to showcase the approaches of community and citizens' engagement in building back better. At the end of the session, I think what we are hoping to achieve is through the dialogue to feed the thoughts and reflections back into the ongoing rethinking process of UNESCO's strategic engagement with SIDS in moving forward. Without further ado, I'd like to move very quickly to the sessions, and I'd like to introduce our first distinguished panelist, Ms. Amrika Singh. Ms. Singh is currently serving as the Program Manager for Sustainable Development at the CARICOM Secretariat in Georgetown, Guyana, where she's responsible for, among other areas, regional coordination on the Small Island Developing States, or SIDS, programs of action, and articulation of a Caribbean Community Natural Resources Policy Framework and Action Plan. Prior to joining the CARICOM Secretariat in 2014, she served for 15 years with the Ministry of Environment in Barbados, where she was the national focal point for coordination on sustainable development issues. I wish to invite Ms. Singh to take the floor. Each panelist has 5 minutes. So we will first hear from Amrika, and she will be looking specifically at how has COVID-19 shaped the CARICOM, Caribbean Small Island Developing States agenda, and what is the role of the agency, the CARICOM Secretariat, in enhancing regional cooperation for building back better. Amrika, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, colleagues. It's a pleasure to talk to you all this morning. I'm still working from home, so any opportunity I get to interact with the region is very much appreciated. I realize I only have 5 minutes, so if we can go quickly, to the first slide. I just wanted to, I should be able to change it from my end, colleagues.
I think we will be doing that from our end.
So can we move on to the next slide, please?
I think David is working on it.
Okay, so let me just start by saying that I found this cartoon, which I thought was really, if we could go up 2 more. Go back, right. Okay, so basically it's a depiction of what we're facing internationally, but more so because we're small and a grouping of small island developing states. We're facing what could be seen as a tsunami of interrelated impacts that will come about as a result of COVID-19, but which we have been dealing with all along. So even while we are focused on keeping afloat during the pandemic, we still have the glaring threat of global climate change. And we also, there is another arm of this that is not reflected here, but which 2020 is important for, which is the threat of biodiversity loss. And 2020 was supposed to be a very important year internationally for biodiversity, because we're about to articulate the new global biodiversity framework. If we quickly move on to the next slide, I wanted to lay out what is the CARICOM framework for building resilience. And this has been purported by CDMA, our disaster management agency, regional disaster management agency, and it has been approved by our heads of government. And it's basically, we see resilience is based on 5 pillars: social protection, economic, enhancing economic opportunities, safeguarding infrastructure, environmental protection, and of course, operational readiness to deal with disasters. And these are in an enabling environment, which is very in line with what UNESCO's thrust is, which is the use of citizen science, youth, involving youth, good governance, data-driven, etc. If we move on to the next slide. So what has been the impact in CARICOM with the COVID-19? I should say that we did get on board very early with the tracking, which has been spearheaded by CARPHA, our Caribbean Regional Public Health Agency. At the political level, our heads of government have been very involved, and they have been meeting continually throughout the year so far, but under the leadership of our previous head of conference, Prime Minister Motley. She has been replaced as chair of conference by the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. There has been a lot of coordination at the technical and political level with various meetings of the relevant ministries. And we're not just talking about health, we're also talking about the home offices for crime and security, disaster preparedness, ministries of agriculture, ministries of education. And we've also had our ministers of finance meet with the tourism sector. I know we're going to move on to talk about tourism, specifically very early on to deal with the cruise line industry, because that was seen as a potential threat or a risk to addressing the public health concerns in the region. Next slide. As I mentioned, it has been a truly regional approach. In addition to CARPHA, CDMA, and impacts have been involved in the CARICOM action to deal with COVID. We have been meeting regularly to deal with the issue of food security and supply chains. We have been working closely with our partners, including the various UN entities, our ministers of finance. We have to remember, when sustainable development, we're talking about it, we can never distance ourselves from the economic realities, and we have to keep on making it known to the international community that we have been classified as, many of us have been classified as middle income countries. And but that being the case, the impact on small island developing states is proportionally more significant than what would happen in a bigger middle income country. We expect to see a sharp shortfall in foreign direct investment in this year in the Caribbean. And we have been pushing for the criteria to classify us to include our special vulnerabilities. And this, the UN has been a very critical partner in making this case. Next slide. And all of this we've been doing with this insight that we're getting ready for a hurricane season that is supposed to be very active, with 19 named storms, 9 hurricanes, and 4 of them expected to be major hurricanes. And many of our member states still facing and expected to face drought conditions for the rest of the year. Next slide. So what have been some of the challenges? While we have been responsive and coordinated as a region, these are some of the challenges that we have been facing first and foremost, the issue of supply chains as it relates to health supplies and as well as food security. And the lesson here as well is these are issues that also pop up normally when we're dealing with a hurricane season. So much less when we're dealing with a global pandemic where basically the larger countries have greater sway in international markets. Next slide. And with respect to UNESCO's intervention, my previous slide, I would have alluded to the close working relationship and the joint advocacy between CARICOM and PAHO, as well as CARICOM and FAO, and the same goes for UNESCO, which has launched a series of webinars and interventions based on the 20 SDG Education 2020 platform, which deals with equity, inclusion, quality, and learning throughout life. A number of webinars have been planned and executed, and the ones done in conjunction with CARICOM include, next slide. Can we go to the next slide, please? Go back one. I just wanted to highlight the areas. Can we go back one? Okay, so the webinars that were done for the Caribbean region focused on, which were done in conjunction with CARICOM Secretariat and other partners, focused on emotional support for learners, parents, and educational personnel, inclusion of children and adolescents with disabilities in distance education, and the gender effects on children during the COVID-19 crisis. So next slide. So what are some of the lessons learned? This has been a very trying period for the Caribbean region, but it has brought some, some heartening lessons, including that we do best when we show solidarity as a region, and we have seen the benefits of regional approaches, tangible benefits of regional approaches when it deals with specifically scarce sourcing vital supplies. It's more feasible for us to go at some things as a region as opposed to individual small island states. We have seen opportunities for South-South cooperation with other states and with SIDS as well. And in this case, we would like to highlight Cuba, which has been sharing health personnel with many countries from the region. We have been able to demonstrate that even though we're dependent on the international financial institutions, we are very self-reliant when we have to be, and we are willing and able to do this with the adequate support. And the other important lesson is that we're too small to leave any of our citizens behind. Those who are elderly, those who are vulnerable, those who don't have access to technology, we cannot leave them behind. Next slide. So with respect to the way forward and building, this is my final slide, so I know I've gone over the 5 minutes. With respect to building resilience in the post-COVID era, the issue of partnerships, we cannot stress how important they are. I've listed some of the key UN agencies that we've worked with, and being UNESCO, PAHO, FAO, there are others, UN-ECLAC. And it is critical that going forward, these partnerships be enhanced to achieve the impactful interventions we need on the ground so that we can make a difference in the life of our most vulnerable CARICOM citizens. We have to get more agile and more assertive about harnessing private sector and philanthropic support. We've seen this being done successfully where many of our heads were able to intervene with the banking and financial sector to negotiate relief for some of our CARICOM citizens with respect to mortgages and credit cards and that sort of thing. And we've seen interventions such as recently Rihanna has donated iPads to the education system in Barbados, which would help with some of the children who are not able to access technologies, to help them access technologies. We have to keep on pushing not just the region, but our international partners as well, the importance of multilateralism. We're operating in a situation where, and COVID has already been going on pre-COVID, and COVID has just made it a little bit worse, in that we're seeing growing nationalism, and small island developing states cannot thrive in a world that is focused on nationalism and national identity. And I'd just like to end by speaking specifically to what I see a potential role for UNESCO is, given its core competencies. One, in utilizing the science and technologies opportunities to address key development issues for CARICOM, including food security, transport, shelter, and ecosystems restoration. This is a private plug for the area that I cover. Strong ecosystems and protection of natural resources means that we will be able to bounce back better from disasters, natural disasters. The other area I think that UNESCO has a comparative advantage in is utilizing its digital platforms for environmental education. It is uniquely placed to reach school-age citizens, whether when they're home, when they're operating from home and beyond. And I say school-age citizens because I'm talking from primary school all the way up to high school. And involving not just the scientists, but also education and cultural representatives, because we have to find ways, creative ways in engaging our young people when they're at home and focus on the computer. There's so many things that compete for their attention, and we have to make sure that we are trying, using whatever means necessary to keep them informed and engaged. And I think that's it for me, Chair, and I will be available to expand and answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Amrita. This has been a very fruitful and informative presentation. Amrita has certainly emphasized the need for collaboration at all levels, and that we can't do it alone. After all, it is a pandemic. And so there's going to be hopefully a lot of lively conversation around Amrita's presentation. I would like to move quickly, therefore, on to the second panelist, and she is Dr. Emily Wilkinson. Our distinguished panelist does a tremendous amount of research in disaster risk reduction, and I've had the pleasure of meeting her in Mexico several years ago. Dr. Wilkinson is has done a lot of work in that area, and she will be focusing on, one second, let me just get my notes together. She will be focusing on her work given in the situation in the aftermath of Hurricane Irma and Maria when it struck the Caribbean in 2017. She will be looking at both the crisis from which to learn and an opportunity to do things better, and how this can be extrapolated into the COVID-19 situation. We would ask her to have a look at what are some of the policy recommendations she can provide policymakers regarding strategies for building back better in the post-COVID-19 situation. And we would like to ask her to look at the recovery efforts in mainstreaming the principle of leaving no one behind. Before I do this and allow Emily to take the floor, I wanted to let you know that Dr. Wilkinson is a senior research fellow at the Overseas Development Institute and co-director of the Caribbean Resilience and Recovery Knowledge Network, as well as the chief scientific advisor to Climate Resilience Execution Agency in Dominica, and a fellow of the UK Natural Environment Research Council. As I've said before, her current research focuses on disaster risk reduction and climate risk management, state responsibility, anticipatory action, and effectiveness and accountability in public policy. I welcome you, Emily. Please take the floor. And 5 minutes for presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and good morning, good afternoon from London. So in my research, I've been looking a lot at the opportunities to build back better and different patterns of response and recovery from crises. And I think in response to what I was asked to talk about, crisis is always potentially an opportunity to build back better. But I think it only really can be realized if we all pay attention to the causes of disaster, or the drivers of risk, and really not just the consequences. So looking at what it was that kind of led to that level of kind of vulnerability and the very sort of deep and widespread impacts, and not just focusing on the most recent events. So we need to be careful about being short-sighted, I think, in this kind of post-COVID-19 context, in really just focusing on that particular crisis. But when I look back at where disasters have created windows of opportunity for policy change and reform, and for developing new strategies and building resilience, what's interesting is that this always happens when a lot of thinking has already been done. So before the disaster happens, when people are already beginning to realize that the kind of model of development is not sustainable, that things need to change, and kind of past mistakes need to be addressed. That's when disasters or crises can create an opportunity to do things differently. So looking back at the experience of Dominica, with which I sort of have now significant kind of experience and very close collaboration with the government, it's interesting to see that with Tropical Storm Erica, there were lots of lessons learned, documents that were produced, and perhaps not all the lessons were learned at the time. There wasn't enough time. Then the country was hit by Hurricane Maria. But after Maria, that was when there was a sort of willingness and a readiness to change, because the ideas around why communities were so vulnerable in the first place, and why systems and the economy was so badly affected were already had already began to be formulated before Maria hit. And that created a very high level of commitment, from the top, from the Prime Minister. And Dominica produced a climate resilience and recovery plan, which is about more than just dealing with climate extremes or events similar to Maria. It is about creating a solid welfare system, diversifying the economy, strengthening food security, digital innovation, all things that are going to help strengthen resilience to shocks of different sorts. So where countries had realized that things needed to change, and had began to develop this kind of agenda before COVID. So I'd already had discussions around alternative forms of tourism, relying less on external tourism, increasing food security, reducing fuel imports, and switching to kind of green energy. Then COVID recovery will present an opportunity to do this. So that's my hypothesis. And I think another opportunity lies in the fact that donors are very much on board with this. And I think there will be more avenues to pursue now, and access to finance will increase despite the economic downturn, because of the focus on this kind of greener, fairer, more resilient post-COVID recovery. So this is the mantra now, and it will benefit countries that have resilience plans and know where they want to go. Everybody's talking about systemic risk and realizing that shocks can spread quickly and across sectors. So resilience is really the way forward. My advice to policymakers, I think, can only be in this context and thinking about small island states to develop homegrown strategies. So policies that have a kind of bold vision for where you want to be in 10 years' time, how society, the economy, the environment can prosper in the face of external shocks, including more intense storms, but thinking more broadly about risk. And to think about the timing and the sequencing. So which initiatives need to be started now because they will take years to set up, which can be easily funded now given the current environment and the focus of the climate funds, which can help to generate income that will be needed to recover from COVID. So I think thinking about these steps and sequencing rather than just sort of trying to do everything at once is going to be really important. The other thing I would say is start, collecting good data. Resilience and demonstrating the progress is critical, and so the data needs to be good and publicly available. You need to understand vulnerability and exposure to hazards and which are the vulnerable sectors of society, and have really good disaggregated data on how people are affected by these crises, and so that will continue to sort of attract funding if you can demonstrate progress in that way. And then finally, on mainstreaming, leave no one behind. I mean, I think one thing that COVID-19 has really taught us is about the importance of investing in solid healthcare systems and social protection, welfare systems. Because these are what will need to be scaled up in a crisis or in anticipation of a crisis. These need to be invested in long term, and they are as important, I would say, as investment in flood defence or investments that are specifically focused on a hazard or reducing exposure to a hazard. I think these measures that are going to just make society stronger, more resilient, and give us a really a good understanding of who is vulnerable and needs to be targeted, who might become vulnerable under particular conditions, and having a social welfare system that can support them is absolutely critical. So I will leave it at that, but I think it's really important to highlight that these are the sort of some of these issues that were kind of understood well previously in development models and approaches, I think have become even more important, and that will be further highlighted if we sort of want to focus on a resilience agenda and being resilient to kind of multiple shocks in the future. So that's really important. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Emily. I'm very much conscious of time. Thank you very much for a comprehensive perspective on DRR and, of course, in the context of the pandemic. What I'd like to do is to move very quickly on to Ms. Nikita Shiel Rolle. I hope I'm getting that pronunciation right. Nikita, I've also met at a meeting in UNESCO, and by way of introduction, she is a conservation biologist by training, and whose purpose in life is to spread ocean love and protect Mother Earth. And because I know Nikita well, I know that's quite very much her personality. Nikita also has a BSc in Biodiversity, Wildlife and Ecosystem Health from the University of Edinburgh, and a BA in Marine Affairs from the University of Miami. She's the owner of Cat Island Mermaid Conservation, Tourism and Wellness Company, and the founder and CEO of Young Marine Explorers and Cat Island Conservation Institute. Nikita, there are a few questions in your presentation which you would have been briefed upon, and they deal with the COVID-19 data and citizen sciences issues. So because I know you will focus on addressing those questions, I turn over to you very quickly so that you can start your presentation. and allow us to have some engagement with our stakeholders and participants who've joined the meeting. Thank you, Nikita.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon for those who are outside of the Caribbean region. It's beautiful to be here today. My name is Nikita Shield-Roll, and I am calling in from the island of Guanima, which was the indigenous name of the island that is currently known as Cat Island in the Bahamas. And today's a special day for us here in the Bahamas as we're celebrating our 47th year of independence. So I believe there's no better way to be celebrating independence in the future of the Bahamas than being part of this conversation with each of you. Wow, okay, so COVID-19 has completely transformed, I think, the way that I look at the world, and it has also highlighted to me how there are major gaps that we urgently need to address in the region. And that being, we have major data gaps in the region. And this is a fundamental problem for us, because without information, we cannot make the best informed and sound decisions. And in the climate crisis that we're living in, we need access to the most relevant information possible. That's the only way that we're going to be able to make this adaptive management, to constantly be adjusting how we are responding to the SDGs and taking action towards achieving the SDGs over this next decade. And so being able to collect data is going to be and must be a priority for us going forward. One thing that I would like to address is that as we move into this next decade, community-driven conservation must be one of the main paths that we take. Many of us who are on this call probably have multiple degrees, and I think it's amazing. It's amazing that we see universities developing and expanding throughout the region, and this is critical. And we have more and more people throughout the region with advanced degrees. However, there is still huge disparity between those of us who have the skills and the scientific knowledge and the masses of our populace who struggle to read and write. And we see this every day in the Bahamas, and I know this is echoed throughout the region. And so if we're really going to be able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals over this next decade and take the climate action required to ensure that all of us on this call survive, because all of our lives are threatened by this climate crisis, we have to ensure that every single person in our island communities or ocean countries are able to understand the realities of the world that we're living in, and then also be part of creating that solution. And this is where I believe community-driven conservation comes in. And I believe community-driven conservation is going to be critical for building resilient small island nations. And this will require us to ensure that everyone in our community has the skill set to engage in the scientific process. I believe over this next decade, our main challenge is going to be, how do we remove the barrier of entry into science to ensure that everyone, the fisherman who maybe never completed high school, or the farmer who maybe does have a master's degree, understands how to read the realities of the world that we're living in. And I believe at the foundation of that lies citizen science, or what sometimes is referred to as public science. So this is science that has been designed by maybe a scientist who then passes on the skills to members in the community who are able to collect information, whether it be about water quality, air quality, or the state of coral reefs. Also though, I think there's going to be an emerging need for us to ensure that members in our local communities have the skills to become scientists themselves, because local community members are already experts in their community in which they live. What now needs to happen is that we need to ensure that community members also have some of the skills to be able to collect relevant data as it relates to maybe sea level rise or salination, or what the state is of biodiversity on our coral reefs. Because understanding this is going to be fundamental to us being able to ensure that policymakers have the accurate local specific information to drive the policy going forward. And so I'm going to end on this point, because I am conscious of the time, that the work that I've been doing with young marine explorers has been building off of work that the UNESCO Sandwatch methodology, really looking at how do we ensure that there are tools available to engage every single person in our community in collecting quality data to help inform our decision makers and our policy makers. And this means, and this is going to be fundamental for all policymakers to take into account, that one, we must be making evidence-based decision-making, and because we don't have access to that data is not an excuse not to do the work to get that. And there are mechanisms now in place for us to ensure that every single person in our community can be part of this data collection process, which means then when you're part of collecting the data, it gives you a specific lens, because now for the first time we can have members, whether they are fishermen or our hoteliers, who are collecting information about the environment in which we live, work, and play, who can be analyzing this data from that local lens, as opposed to which has often been happening in the region, where outside scientists are often the ones who collect the data, interpret the data, and share that knowledge with us. And this is going to be a critical, fundamental change that must happen as we move into this next decade, and we ensure that we are the ones creating our future. And that means we have to have that information to make sure that we can make the best decisions possible going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikita. Thank you. Again, a very insightful presentation in terms of community engagement in science and contributions to guiding policy making. Our final panelist is Mr. Luis David Almeida Famada, sorry. And he is a researcher at the Cuban Environment Agency and the director of the international project Mangla Vivo. Sorry, hope my Spanish gets a little better. Louis, I want to ask you to begin your presentation. Again, I know that you will be looking at adaptation in anticipation of the adverse effects of climate change and taking appropriate action to prevent or minimize damage that the climate change may cause, as well as even some of the maladaptation measures that we sometimes pursue in the Caribbean. And we'd like you to speak obviously from your perspective, both working at the national and local levels in terms of enhancing adaptive capacity. And the last question, of course, is how do you see the current COVID-19 pandemic impacting on challenges and opportunities for the region to become far more resilient? Over to you, Louis.
Good. Fine. Do you see me? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for allowing me to participate in this seminar. And greeting for the young people of the network. I am happy to share with you again. And for my experience, how we can improve the adaptive capacity to the climate change in our country. Where I start from the premise that all we are developing country, and that limits our option in adaptation, action, and approach. But regardless of the approach, the best way to adapt is not only to the climate change, but to any change is by increasing and improving the resilience in our system, natural as socio-economic system. These tasks are identified in the SEEDS action plan in 2016 and 2029. But now, for my experience on the project, how we can raise this resilience. First, in the natural system, applying as necessary action of rehabilitation, restoration, conservation, or sustainable use. We in the project have worked to restore coastal wetland, the protective function of water, soils, marine and biodiversity. It has been by design proven that the mangroves are capable to disperse 80% for the wave energy. Our ancestor knew that well. Hello? They took refuge behind the mangrove. You can hear me?
I'm hearing you, Louis. I think the other participants are.
Okay. Okay. And we are not saying that this ecosystem cannot be used by the community. You can separate the protective mangrove forest and the plantation, which can be inland, by the way. Another sustainable use for this forest is the breeding of the bee of the genus Melipona, our native American bee, which honey is the one of the most expensive on the market. Now, in socio-economic system is in other sense. One of the main challenges is to solve the eternal contradiction between environmental awareness and the money. This contradiction is our day-to-day battle. And how this battle fought? I am going to give you 4 fundamental keys. First, demonstrating that with scientific evidence that climate change affects us all, even everyone pocket, demonstrating that the increasing in living condition of the community is an investment we will generate, income in the future. Look, according to the research in the project, and for even dollar investment, there was a profit for $6 consider ecosystem system, of course. This is one. The 2 is working with the future generation, our children. But we must think not only about the local initiative, but also about influence in education plan in country level. And 3, influence the legal framework and land use plan of the territory. We must close the cycle. If in a research we demonstrate a new vulnerable area and a new natural way to mitigate flooring and a new economic alternatives that generate income to the community, this result must be written in the plan development, in the development plan, or a strategy or investment plan on any level, local and national level. And the last one, the 4th, and we have become in decision maker in any level, but we must become leader committed to the knowledge, committed with the science and socio-environmental resilience and the true sustainable development. We must seek that famous knowledge society, combining more scientific knowledge with our tradition. This is the four key, the project work in the 5 years of yeah. Okay, now the second question. Are there new challenges or opportunity arising for the COVID-19 for your work? Well, we, the Caribbean Young Youth Network, are used to having crises because both COVID and climate change cause crisis. The first COVID crisis has been quick and in the short term, but climate change generates crisis in a slower but much more longer manner. And for the seeds, climate change and COVID have one thing in common. They affect us more because we are surrounded by the sea and most of our economy depend on the torrents. But I think that is an opportunity to consider several things that can help us to fight against COVID and the climate change. First, the importance of the social awareness. Taking care of yourself, you are taking care of others. Second, working together is now more important than ever. Above all, among us, the Caribbean states. Third, the importance of protected state. The country's main resource, agriculture, food, medicine industry, should be accessible to all, especially in time of crisis. And finally, we must take advantage of one of most obviously opportunity that this pandemic gave us: distant jobs, which is not only beneficial economically but also environmentally. And for our work in the network is even more important. First reason should be the great idea. So for this reason, should be a great idea to create an integrated web platform to work together on the research projects, a mixture of our project manager web, social network, and repository. Imagine a space where you can create your profile, see a project, join it. This space will allow to dialogue and collaborate and have free access to publication, course, conference, scholarships, and this space could be accessible to the decision makers. The technology issues may seem difficult, and it is, but it's not the most difficult one. The difficulty is that the results are used by the decision makers. Here is the challenge. Now, this is all my ideas.
Oh, great, Louis. Thank you very much. Again, another excellent presentation. Some key points resonating with earlier presenters about the need for data sharing, the need for collaboration, the need for far more enriching dialogue, and the need for social awareness building, socially aware societies that we've talked about, knowledge societies in the Caribbean. So yes, these have all been excellent contributions, and I think they provide the platform for opening up the discussion to the participants, who I'm sure are anxiously awaiting this session to contribute in terms of how do we move forward in the post-pandemic period. I would like to, there are a couple of questions coming in, and I am going to answer one or two of them very quickly, or rather read out for you and ask the presenters to answer the questions that relate to them. This question is directed to Dr. Wilkinson, and it says, you mentioned that less reliance on external tourism, but how do you balance this with the need for foreign exchange? Unlike other countries, Caribbean cities rely on the influx of foreign exchange, and domestic tourism will not be able to give us the resilience or to help us circulate money within the economy. Emily, would you like to ponder and respond to this question?
Sure, I'll give it a go. I mean, I think this is a really tough one, and for sure I don't have all the answers. But I don't think the point is to say we shouldn't be relying on tourism at all, because many countries and large and small rely heavily on tourism income. But I think the point is more, if there is a shock, and that income drops, what are the sort of alternative sources of income, livelihoods, and and really it's a question of having a diversified economy, and I think that applies everywhere. So for the Caribbean and for small islands, there are really there are many opportunities to diversify, to invest in science and technology, as one of the other speakers said, you know, to have a really well-educated workforce and a really highly qualified workforce, and who are able to provide these kind of high-end services. And we're seeing now as well with the COVID crisis and, you know, people moving around a lot less, that there's a desire to procure services kind of remotely, and so, you know, designers and IT specialists and software developers and so on who are good, their skills are very much still needed. So I'm not an expert on that topic, but I think it's certainly one to consider in the mix of making islands more resilient to climate change and to other shocks that will affect the level of tourism in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily. There is another question from Audrey Cloney, and it says, this is not a question. I just wanted to add, Louis, that we can be more specific in creating these knowledge societies by using our network of clubs. So it's not a question, but I think Audrey is agreeing with Louis on the need for networking and using our knowledge societies to enhance our resilience. I see there's another question. Mazzilli Milano Lombardo, what example of ongoing or past South-South cooperation among Caribbean states do you think could be a reference for promoting increased and improved resilience across the region? Is there any member of the panel who would like to take a shot at answering this question? What example of ongoing or past South-South cooperation among Caribbean states do you think could be a reference point for promoting increased and improved resilience across the region?
Hi, I'm Rika here. There's so many that I'm drawing a blank right now, but it depends on the area of endeavor. So we have several that we can speak to in the area of renewable energy. You know, and not just South-South, we have examples of triangular cooperation, so North-South, and with intergovernmental organizations. The area of renewable energy is a critical one. In the area right now, we have some interesting partnerships in the area of early warning systems that is being spearheaded by our Center for Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology, which is based in Barbados. And they have been able to build some partnerships across the SIDS what we call interregionally, so between Caribbean SIDS and Pacific SIDS. We have a number of partnerships in the areas of fisheries. So if you go across the spectrum of the sectors that we may wish to look at in addressing resilience, whether it be, and as I said, we have five pillars that we focus on, and I mentioned some of the sectors that emerged as priority for the CARICOM region, being food security, supply chain management, transport, and ecosystem restoration. In each of those areas, we could point to initiatives that we would have engaged in the past, whether it be with Southern partners in Latin America or with other SIDS regions, that can be, with the right support, can be scaled up. So there are examples existing that we can draw from. Thanks.
Thank you, Amrika. Thank you. I'd like to invite any of the participants to ask a question via the Q&A session. If there is any particular point that you think diverges from what the panelists presented, if you'd like to ask the question, and it surrounds what do you think would be the main ingredients for building back resilience? If you would like to, if there is any divergent thinking on what are the main ingredients for building back resilience, if you'd like to post the question.
Michelle, while we're waiting, I'd like to just make
Sure.
a comment on that last question. I think what we really need to explore now is how can we strengthen partnerships from communities to communities? Because we do a lot of partnerships and there's a lot of exchange, I think, at a governmental level, at an organizational level, which is good. And also, I believe there's a huge need for us to help people in the communities that are the most vulnerable understand that they're also not alone, and that when initiatives are being implemented within their community, that there are also people in maybe other islands or even in South America that are also working on these projects. I think what can often happen is that we can, climate change and even COVID-19, when you're in a small remote island community, it's so far out of your realm of understanding what it really means to you. And so I think being able to make those connections where there is another community on another island who's also taking action will really help to solidify for community members, this is bigger than me, because often you can't see it when you're just in your tiny island community.
Yeah. Thanks, Nikita, for that intervention. In fact, I'm a firm believer in collective wisdom. I think there is much to be distilled from the collective wisdom of people all around the world in terms of how we have handled the pandemic. And the Caribbean has to be commended for the limited resources that we have had and how we have managed the crisis. We took radical action from the very early days, locking down our societies, and we as Caribbean people showed that we had the discipline to follow what our leaders were saying in terms of the measures, the drastic measures which had to be taken. And I think we, as a region, and as Caribbean citizens, we need to commend ourselves for doing what was necessary at the height of the crisis. Yes?
I completely agree. Yeah, I completely agree. And just one comment on that. I really would like to encourage policymakers and decision makers, because I know, in the Bahamas right now, we don't have tourism, and it's exciting. The next panel is going to be focusing on tourism. Mm-hmm. But I want to encourage us that we can create a definition for ourselves outside of being these tourism dependent island communities or ocean countries. And that while we depend 100% on this foreign dollar that needs to come in, I really believe now is the time for us to reimagine, and I know this is what this platform is really supposed to be, but know that we can create more resilient communities. And really, we cannot pretend that before COVID everything was perfect, because it wasn't. The model of tourism that we employed specifically in the Bahamas, but I know that we see around the region, was not a sustainable model, and it was going to break one way or another. COVID just happened to be the thing that sort of made us all pause. And so as we look forward as to what will and what can our region look like, what can be the new economic engines for us, I really want us, as scary as it may be, because we don't actually know. And, in the Bahamas right now, we've got about 40% unemployment, and that is huge for our little population. it's important for us to, one, believe that we are brilliant people, and then as we work as a region, we can really create the change that we need. And more so as we think about climate change, as a region, we must work together, because individually our voices will not be heard. And so collectively, we must become the leaders, because all of us are feeling it. And as we know, as the speaker from CARICOM said, you know, we've got potentially 19 storms. And right now in the Bahamas, we're experiencing the climate crisis, having come off of the worst hurricane to ever hit the region, being Hurricane Dorian, and then 7 months later being COVID-19. This is what the climate crisis looks like, in addition to all the other things. And so I want to encourage everyone listening, all the participants, yes, we're going to have to do things differently, and it's going to be scary. And also, we have the ability to create the future that we want for us. And that is really exciting.
Yep, that's true. Thank you, Nikita. Again, very innovative thinking on your part. I'm not seeing any further questions. And
sorry, Chair.
Yes, please.
Hi,
Juliana?
Amrika. Hi, it's Amrika.
Okay.
I just wanted to make a quick point, building off of the point you made about the CARICOM, or the Caribbean response, and how disciplined, for the want of a better word, that it is. And I'm going to take the opportunity of having this being a UNESCO platform, because I think this speaks directly to UNESCO and its mandate. There is an issue that we have in this global economy and global digitized economy as small island developing states, where the messages that come at us are very international in nature. Now, we will, the response that you alluded to was very science-driven. You know, it involved the decision makers, the medical practitioners, the epidemiologists, etc., and a society that was receptive to the messages and listening to scientific evidence. This is something as small island developing states we have to preserve. I just wanted to leave the example of Samoa just prior to the COP in 2019, where basically they had an early public health crisis where they had to basically shut down their borders and shut down their country as a result of an outbreak of measles. And that was driven in part by an anti-vaccination sentiment. And their public health institutions came under attack from anti-vaccine groups based in the United States. So these things now, you know, there's freedom of speech and freedom of belief, and those things can play out in larger countries, but we don't have the luxury of playing around with people's lives in small island developing states. And the issue of global digital economies and cultural norms in small island settings, I think is something that requires further examination and further discussion. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Amrita. I think that we have come to the closing part of the session. Juliana, do you want me to make any summary points here, or should I turn it over to you? Not hearing you. Your mic is off, Juliana.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
That's
thank
okay.
you so much. We could have a really brief summary if you wish, like 2 minutes maybe.
2 minutes. Yes,
apologies for the delay to everyone.
Yes, that's okay. It was a highly productive session, and the presenters were really on point. What has clearly come out is that when we're talking about resiliency building and looking forward at the sort of new canvas given to us in casting what our future looks like post-COVID-19, we're basically talking about people, we're talking about money or finance, and we're talking about the environment. It gives us a whole new opportunity to look at how societies operate, how we are going to make our economies resilient, and an opportunity to rethink how we've been using our environmental resources and moving forward to attaining the sustainable development goals that we've always talked about. There are a couple of points that obviously line up. The need for collaboration at all levels. It came out in Amrika's presentation, it came out in Emily's presentation, and some of the other panelists. I must say that CARICOM has presented us with a great framework for moving forward. And I like Emily's suggestion that we do need to look inward somewhat to look at homegrown solutions, see how we can support domestic tourism as Caribbean nationals. I think the new mantra definitely is to look at some degree of self-reliance. I liked the discussion around the need for good quality data, the use of empirically driven research to inform policy in the future. And I liked the point about the fact that when we are collecting data, that data has to be shared, not just with the international community, but with our local scientists. And again, it talks about collaboration, putting the collective wisdom together. And Louisa's final presentation about the need to create space for dialogue and for data sharing and new knowledge platforms using digital technology certainly is something that we've all been talking about in the region. And I think we, on a very optimistic note, we can look forward to a very bright future. And I want to thank all the panelists for their time and to UNESCO for giving us the opportunity to share our ideas in shaping a brighter future. Thank you, Juliana. Over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Professor Maiku, and also dear panelists. This was a very strong, they were very strong and instructive contributions. And especially, as you have already mentioned, for highlighting the menu of actions that we need to collectively take to make building back better, not just a good sounding alliteration. So now, with a little bit of delay, we would like to turn to the next session on reflecting on the way ahead for Caribbean tourism and on youth perspectives. And for this session, I'm really pleased that we have Professor Dr. Lloyd Waller here with us today. Dr. Waller is a professor of digital transformation policy and governance at the University of the West Indies, MONA. His primary areas of research are digital transformation, policy, advanced research methodologies, tourism resilience, and democratic governance. Dr. Waller is also the chair of social sciences at the Jamaica National Commission for UNESCO, and he's the senior advisor to the Minister of Tourism for Jamaica, and he's also the executive director of the Global Tourism Resilience and Crisis Management Center. So Professor Waller, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Juliana. I think you have to make some changes there for my camera.
Oh, okay. Let me check.
I think you're controlling the video
David,
there.
can you help us? My colleague.
Okay.
1 second.
Okay, I think it's on right
yes,
now. Good, excellent.
Great.
All right, thanks, and thanks, Julian, and thanks, UNESCO, for having me for this very innovative and relevant and appropriate and timely panel. And let me just start by a quick opening. The coronavirus pandemic has disrupted politics, economics, social life, geopolitics, and businesses worldwide. Through the traditional media and digital media, the world is witnessing a rapid and unprecedented transformation of systems, structures, processes, institutions, and the relationships between them. This is particularly the case of the global tourism trade. One interesting observation in the world system today has essentially been how tourism-dependent small island developing states are navigating the coronavirus pandemic. The success stories of many tourist-dependent Caribbean islands, I'm sure, will be researched for years to come. Today, however, we want to start the discussion on one aspect of this curiosity by looking at how social cultural issues such as youth participation and climate change and heritage and culture, as well as Caribbean seas, sustainable tourism, tourism resilience, and the coronavirus combined together, and to look at the outcomes of this for the future of the Caribbean. And when I say the future, of course, I'm here thinking about the young people, the youth of the Caribbean. And to look at this particular issue, we have what I consider to be the best panel to discuss this particular matter. And we'll go through the different aspects and the different issues. So for the panelists, for clarity, we're going to go through in this particular order. We'll start with Ms. Eleanor Terrelong, who is the director and founder of the Jamaica Climate Change Youth Council and the focal point for the UNESCO Caribbean Youth Network on climate change. This will be followed by Dr. Michelle McLeod, who is a tourist expert at the University of the West Indies, and she's also on the University of the West Indies COVID-19 Task Force and the program director for the Center for Hotel and Tourism Management, UAE, Bahamas. We will then move on to, and this is where it starts to become very complicated, and I hope I pronounce the names properly, Mr. Jurnek Merced, who is the Curacao Culinary Team 2019 I Am Achieving Winner, and also the Taste of the Caribbean coordinator as well. And then we will also have Ms. Maria Moras, who is the EU UNESCO consultant on the Trans Culture Program. And finally, we will have Mr. Teran Sims, who is the coordinator of sustainable development for the Bahamas Ministry of Tourism and Innovation. So we will start with Ms. Eleanor Terrelong. Ms. Terrelong?
All right, good.
Welcome. So Ms. Terrelong, we're going to ask you to do a 3-minute introduction, not necessarily of yourself, but of the issues. And thereafter, and each person will be given 3 minutes to speak. And then thereafter, I'll ask a couple questions. And if we have some time, we'll open up the floor to the audience to ask questions. So the general question that I'm thinking I would want to ask is, what has the COVID-19 situation taught us about tourism in Caribbean small island developing states?
All right, good morning again, everyone, and thank you for having me. I think that the first lesson that we all as a Caribbean really could learn from COVID-19 is how unsustainable our dependence on tourism is. I mean, it's been a model that we've been using for years, and we've been using it to generate income across the region. But we see how in the case of a crisis like this, all of a sudden, our economies can become crippled. And it's important for us to realize that, okay, we have to reimagine what the tourism model looks like. Not only, I mean, we also need to look at diversifying our economies overall, just reducing the dependence on tourism across the board. I mean, but for the purpose of this panel, we also need to be reimagining what tourism looks like. Something that I keep saying is that COVID-19 has provided us with this very small window of opportunity for us to now be innovative, to make radical change. This is a time for us to experiment. And I can say personally for me here in Jamaica, I don't know if Prof. Waller will be happy with me saying this, but I was a little disappointed that we just opened back our borders, and it seemed that we were returning to business as usual when it came to tourism. I didn't really feel like we were looking at any ways to change the model. For example, within our council, we've been hosting a series of chats, and some of the things that we've talked about in terms of reimagining tourism is looking at alternatives like ecotourism, which addresses more than one issue, because we're also looking at climate change and environmental protection. So there are layers of sustainability that we need to build within our tourism sector. Looking at things like medical tourism, looking at intra-regional, I think personally we could have opened up our borders to the region as opposed to the whole world at first, and build that sort of intra-regional tourism again. I know that a big challenge for intra-regional tourism is the travel fees within the Caribbean. And we all see what's happening with LIAT right now. And those are things that we need to be addressing as a CARICOM or as a Caribbean with the different heads of governments, because those are really the people in the decision-making positions right now. And I think that I kind of feel like we might be wasting this crisis, because I don't know if the push for us to innovate and to change how we look at things, for example, the big hotels versus the more boutique hotels, domestic tourism, and all of these things in addition will go back and provide value for the communities and for our citizens, economic value for us. So I don't know if we are, quote unquote, wasting the crisis, but I really would like us to kind of use the time and, as I said, reimagine what tourism would look like. And I think that that's why youth voices are so important. I know that we as young people don't know everything, but we also have different perspectives that, combined with the experiential knowledge, I think that we can really assist with how we kind of just retool ourselves and re-strategize what the tourism model will be going forward to withstand some of these shocks and crises. So that's my little 2 cents.
Thank you very much. And it's much more than a 2 cents. It's $1 million. All right. Thank you very much. And now we turn to Dr. Michelle McLeod, my colleague on campus. Dr. McLeod, as I said earlier, is a tourist expert, and she's also the program director of the Center for Hotel and Tourism Management at the University of West Indies in the Bahamas. And she's also on the University of West Indies COVID-19 task force. Michelle?
Yes, good afternoon here in the Bahamas.
Good afternoon, Michelle. The floor is yours.
Yes, if I am to answer some questions that were posed to me.
Well, Michelle, I should have actually said it. It's the same question, really. It's the exact same question. So it's for all the panelists, the first question.
Right. Okay, so in terms of the response to tourism, and several Caribbean tourism destinations, they have responded, I would say, more than adequately to the COVID-19 crisis. Of course, there was the time of where public health and safety would have been the prime consideration. So we had, closing of borders and a total shutdown. But across the Caribbean, the COVID-19 virus has been contained. And so now the destinations are in the phase of reopening. Several countries, they have posted their recovery plans as to how that will be coming about. Of course, there are plans not only to look at international tourism, but looking at domestic tourism. Tourism takes many different forms. And even as with the reopening, you would have regional and foreign visitors coming into the destination. You do have domestic tourism that can happen between islands and between, when you talk about between Caribbean countries, the intra-regional tourism. But I think beyond that, the Caribbean has to look at certain plans that have been on the board for years, such as the multilateral air services agreement that will facilitate the movement of carriers between the Caribbean countries. We have to look very closely and move forward in terms of getting such agreements finalized so that the interregional airlines can be supported. And in addition to which, we have to look at recovery plans that not only will ensure the health and safety of visitors and locals alike, but recovery plans that will support the sustainability of Caribbean tourism destinations. And I think while this panel discussion will focus on the youth voice would be very important, and how they participate in being heard in all these plans will be very important, because the youth, you are our future.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And of course, I'll expand some more on what you discussed in the summary. So we now move to Mr. Jernik Merced. I think
yes,
I
sir.
have the name Jernik, and
Perfectly.
I see. Excellent, perfect. Thank you, Jernik. So then you're on for the next 3 minutes, and it's the same question we're asking. Essentially, what has the COVID-19 situation taught us about tourism in Caribbean, small island developing states?
Well, it has taught us a lot. Me personally, I think I try to be a bit more optimistic about it. You know, there was a lot of negative things that happened, but even though we have to face that fact, I think that we have to also focus on how it helped us, you know, rethink the way we live, the way we do business, of course, hygiene, how we take care of other people, how we, you know, behave around each other. And for me personally, it helped me to, you know, it gave me time to sit back and rethink the way I do, you know, my passion, the way I how do you say, execute it. And it also made me think how to be more sustainable, you know, how to make more of what you have, and, you know, also help the climate. Like something positive also is that this climate changed. It got a bit better compared to what it was. And for me, I like to focus on what the positive is and how that can help us come with new innovative ideas for business. And, you know, when this is all over in a few months or years, I don't know how long it's going to last. You know, we will be we'll be on the basis that it would be much more stronger to keep going in the future in the tourism sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. And I'm hoping that it will last. It will end before 2021 begins. And I'm more than positive that many other persons are also hoping. Thank you very much, Mr. Merced. We now have Miss Maria Moras. Maria, are you on? Ms. Moras is the EU UNESCO consultant, and she's also for the Transculture program. Maria, are you on? Not seeing Maria. I don't know if she Maria?
Yes, I'm
Excellent.
here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. You may need to tilt your camera down a little bit. We can't see you. Right, down some more. We're only seeing you. Excellent, excellent, Maria. Perfect. All right. So you have the floor, and it's the same question.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for the introduction, and I would like to say that I'm really happy to be here today representing the UNESCO Regional Office for Culture in Latin America and the Caribbean, and of course, as a member of the Caribbean Youth Network for Climate Change. I'm with colleagues here today that I met last time in December in La Habana as Professor Michael, Nikita, Luis, Aureliano. Well, it is clear that the COVID-19 pandemic has shaken economies worldwide, and although all countries are suffering through the same storm, it's true that not all countries are suffering the same way. The small island developing states heavily depend on the cultural and creative industry and on the tourism sector. We know that we cannot go back, that before this pandemic we were already in crisis. We know that the over-tourism was causing a great resentment on local communities and contributing to the climate change. As Jernik just pointed out, it is also time to focus on the opportunity in the window that this pandemic has opened, that has given us, to rethink how we want the future to be. So to answer the question, I would like to highlight three main points, three main ideas. And it's one, that CCI can help to promote and preserve cultural heritage, whether it's tangible or intangible in the local area. This is about promoting a tourism that isn't hedonistic, that is about promoting a tourism that goes beyond the seek for pleasure just for pleasure. Cultural tourism has to offer to the tourist the possibility of knowing the traditions, the heritage, and the wealth of the diversity of the destination. Here I'm talking not just about economic development, but I'm talking about social transformation. It is about rescuing the autonomy of the local, the magic which plays the Caribbean unique and different, rather than offering services whose sole purpose is the search for pleasure empty of content. This leads me to the next idea, which is that CCI will help by promoting a tourism that sees on culture a reason of self-realization. What do I mean with this is that promoting tourism in which leisure and education and living experience goes hand by hand for all the people involved in it. I mean, from the visitor, from professionals, or for the community that welcomes the tourist. It is having in mind that the experience that the tourist seeks goes beyond just a cultural or recreational activity. It is having in mind that the experience that the tourist seeks is to enjoy his free time by approaching a cultural identity, a place, a history, a monument, a religion. It is by doing so that the tourist will learn something from it and that will get personal enrichment. In this sense, the experience of cultural tourism requires that the cultural identity of its destination become the content of the proposal that the community has to offer them. Finally, creative industries are an important tool for socio-economic development and for urban and regional revitalization. This is talking about culture, this is talking about CCI as business, as a sector that is based on individual creativity and talent, in particular for young people and creatives. And this sector boosts productivity, employment, and sustainable economic growth. At the same time, that we strengthen our social cohesion and our social integration that as Caribbean we need to promote. So the development of CCI and promoting cultural tourism cannot be separate, and it needs to promote social participation. From the UNESCO, in the sense, the EU and the UNESCO will boost cultural and creative industries as an engine for sustainable development through the Transcultural program. This program seeks to deepen integration between Cuba, the Caribbean, and the European Union, that in this context of COVID-19 seems more important than ever. The program is built on two main components. The first focusing on strengthening the skills and capacities for young cultural professionals, and the second by enhancing opportunities to knowledge transfer and exchanges. The program, the COVID-19 framework, will give finance to those young cultural professionals through an incubator program to promote initiatives and professional interconnections within the creative industries and the cultural tourism sector. This way, the program will promote projects that boost creativity and innovation and cultural tourism to align efforts with communities in the region, with communities in the Caribbean, to retain their cultural diversity and enhance economic growth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for those insightful words. We now turn to Mr. Terrence Sims, who is the coordinator for the Sustainability Department at the Bahamas Ministry of Tourism and Aviation. Mr. Sims? Mr. Sims,
Can you hear me?
Yes, we're hearing you now. Excellent. And we're asking the same question. What has the COVID-19 situation taught us about tourism in the Caribbean, small and developing states? So it's the same question. So we're going to give you 3 minutes to speak, and then we'll move on to the second round of questions. So the floor is now yours, Mr. Singh.
Thank you. Good day, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this dynamic conversation today on tourism from a youth perspective. When we look at COVID-19 and the global the impact that it had on tourism, I would say it's not one of a surprise. There are a lot of papers out there on global stresses that impact tourism. Of course, we've seen this during the Spanish flu. We've seen this from an economic perspective from the global recession in 2008. We've also seen this as a region, a Caribbean region, from 9/11. So it was not a surprise that because the global travel sector was closed down, that we suffered what we suffered. However, what we can do amidst this time is diversify our tourism product offering. And I'll be talking about community-based tourism approaches and how do we build resilience for global stresses such as climate change and natural hazards. Community-based tourism is a viable solution to increase socio-economic levels within small rural Caribbean communities. Based on, for travelers, the demand of travelers today, travelers are becoming more affluent and they want to be integrated into local communities. No longer do travelers want to be a part of an experience, but they want to be a part of making an experience. And community-based tourism offers just that. In Caribbean communities, we have an opportunity now to allow tourists to be integrated into local communities and give the opportunity for locals in these communities to develop businesses surrounding tourism products. I can speak to the Bahamas. In the past, our tourism product was developed based on mostly foreign direct investment. When people spoke of the Bahamas, they spoke about Atlantis and didn't reference the country's name. And now we have the Big Bahama project. But when we go into what we call our outer islands, the city, which is Nassau, located on the island of New Providence, then the second city, Freeport, located on the island of Grand Bahama. Outside of that, we have 14 other islands with rich culture, all different experiences. And having worked in the rural area for the first 2 years of my career with the government in tourism, I found that people visiting these areas had a more enriching experience than those who would have visited the city. They were integrated into the culture, and the local community was able to benefit off of this directly instead of indirectly through employment. But they were benefiting directly from opening businesses surrounding the tourism industry. And this is all combined with research done by Euromonitoring, which was commissioned by the Caribbean Tourism Organization and Compete Caribbean. They found that based on the US market, they found that there was a higher willingness to pay for community-based tourism products. So for the areas that they investigated was one, local tourism. They noticed that respondents to their surveys were willing to pay up to $300 for a talk conducted by a community member. Food and beverage, they realized that people were willing to pay up to $300 for a classic food tour. Traditional cuisine, they realized that at local restaurants, people were willing to pay up to $100 for a local dish. And for farm-to-table experiences, people were willing to pay again up to $100. And how do you do this with your local community? It's simple, through experiential tourism development. So experiential tourism development is where, as I said before, you bring the visitor in to making the experience with you rather than just experiencing it. So for example, in the Bahamas, we love what we call conch salad. And whenever somebody comes here, they want to get a conch salad. It's like a conch ceviche. So instead of just selling a $12 bowl of conch ceviche, what we're going to be doing with locals, conch stands and Andres, is teaching them how do I create this into an experience. And a basic format is, instead of having them around the corner, bring them around the corner with you to make this conch salad. You place the conch salad in a bowl that is made out of a conch shell. You eat the conch with a spoon that is made out of a conch shell. And here you can sell this product for $150, which you was once selling for just $12, just by changing the format on how you display it to the customer. Another example of how community-based tourism has develop and increase economics in Caribbean communities, I have two examples. One is the fly fishing tourism sector in the Bahamas. Fly fishing started back in the 1970s when local communities noticed that a lot of rich American aristocrats were traveling to the Bahamas to fly fish, to catch what we call mainly the bonefish, permit, and tarpon. And in a local community, in Andros, mostly throughout the entire island, local guides were trained to take the visitors out. And this has spilled over today into local guiding services and also local lodging. And we did some market research and we saw that fly fishing visitors had a 4 times higher purchasing power than those visitors coming to islands such as Nassau and Atlanta. And what this tells us is that we can ensure that we don't meet carrying capacity of natural environments because fly fishing occurs in the mangroves and we don't want too much people interacting with these ecosystems because it can be damaging. But the mere fact that they have a higher purchasing power and they're willing to pay more for a trip, for a pristine environment, shows that we are balancing sustainability, economic, environment, and the social aspect of these communities. Another example is Treasure Beach in Jamaica. Back in 2016, the Jamaican government poured $48 million into making what they call the Treasure Beach Community-Based Cluster Project. Now Treasure Beach is a viable tourism product in the Jamaican community and has had significant impact on the local economics of that community. And when we combine this and look at treks towards these kind of tourism, such as climate change, there are 4 major elements we need to focus on to build what we call the adaptive capacity of local tourism businesses, especially owned by local community members, to combat this and mitigate damage. Education. From research done, we found that the perception of climate change by a lot of locals is not exactly what it is, so therefore they have not a clue on how to adapt to climate change. Inclusion in discussion and policy making. Most times when it comes to climate change policy development within the Bahamas, the people who are mostly impacted are left out of the conversation. 3, knowledge sharing. Again, being left out of the conversation because there's a perception that because you're not academically inclined in the area or have written a published paper, you don't have anything to add to the conversation. But anthropogenic examples can be very crucial to the discussion of climate change because you live it and you understand nature in an intricate manner than those who are far distance from it. And innovation. We need to move forward innovatively when it comes to climate change. We have to brainstorm on how do we develop better building codes for the tourism sector so we can open up quickly. How about having non-fixed structures? You just have platforms and the development of yachts. Yachts are what we call fancy tents, and they can be taken down in about say an hour before. They can be taken down and restructured in a timely fashion. So we have to think innovatively if we're gonna combat and compete in this current environment. And lastly, the youth perspective is important in the Caribbean when it comes to sustainable tourism development because the exact slogan of Rio 20, we have to create the future we want. We have to be a part of the discussion. This is no longer discussion that is left for one generation, rather a discussion that needs to be engaged with each and every generation. It is for all of us. It is my future, it is your future. It's the future of our grandkids, our great-grandkids to come. So everybody's voice must be heard and the youth voice must be heard. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoy the discussion and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. And this now brings us to the close of, let's just say, the first section of the presentations. And we have a second section where we have specific questions for each person. It's just one question. And we're going to kind of ask you if you could just spend another 2 to 3 minutes to respond to this question. So we'll start with Eleanor. And Eleanor, what we'd like to know from you is how can we mobilize young people to shape the future of the Caribbean in a more sustainable way?
So pivoting off of what was just said, I think that first of all, we have to be including young people in these discussions, and not just having youth discussions. While I appreciate panels like this one where you hear from the youth, we also need to ensure that we are involving youth at the decision-making panels as well. So that is the first thing. Once we have people from the communities, from the youth coming with their ideas, and young people feel like they're being heard, I think that's the first step in terms of just getting everybody on the same page, because there are also things that we as young people would have to learn. How do we mobilize young people? I think young people, we realize that we have to do things differently. We're looking at our economic future. We're looking at the future of our physical future as well. We are looking at what our prospects are going to be and what kind of countries we are going to be living in. So I think in terms of personal investment, we are already invested. We don't need to buy in. We don't need to be worrying about how to get youth to buy in. Youth are in. What we need to focus on is what is the strategy to move forward? What is it that young people can add? I think in terms of us as a region, as a regional network, and conversations like this, it's really easy to pick up on what are the similar themes and the similar currents running through all the Caribbean countries. For example, Nikita and I, we speak from time to time, and we participate in each other's events. And what we have found is that community projects that I might be doing here are similar to projects that she is doing there. And that way we're able to share best practices, share information. I think that as a Caribbean region, that really is what I think underpins all of this, that this is an issue that we have to tackle as a region instead of as the individual countries. And especially now in the COVID time that everything is so virtual based, I do think that that is where young people can also add a lot of expertise and a lot of knowledge. Not that older people aren't really technologically capable, but young people do have more energy and more innovative ideas when it comes to how to reach people virtually. Do we reach people through social media? What is the best way to actually get young people to know about the message? As I said, I feel like the buy-in is already there, but it's more important for us to get the information out, get ideas from young people, and then give them the space to be able to collaborate and to make recommendations going forward. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. And I've done some, and I share some of your sentiments because I've worked with a lot of young persons, and I personally find them to be extremely innovative as it relates to, generally speaking, on anything. And in everything that I do, I always try to see how I can include some fresh new ideas, and usually that comes from the young people. Thank you very much. Michelle, I know you've done a lot of work with tourism, and you've engaged a lot of young persons through this work. What has been your experience working with young people in the tourism space, and how can we get more persons in that space?
I think certainly the innovative capacity of young persons are tremendous. When I reflect, we did a local community tourism tour in Augustown, Kingston, Jamaica. And what that involved is having young persons come out and map their community, understand the cultural assets, the physical assets of their community, and utilize that to build an innovative tool using an app as well. And so what you had is persons in the community looking at tourism opportunities differently, wanting to get involved and engage in tourism opportunities, not only from an economic standpoint, which is always very important, but also from a socio-cultural standpoint, and understanding the importance of inviting persons to understand your community as well. So you have that cultural heritage aspect of tourism being promoted. Certainly as well, you have a lot of young persons who engage in tourism clubs. And there isn't anything fantastic. It's just adopting a hotel or adopting an attraction and engaging with that, supporting that activity in the tourism club, working with your local tourist board or your destination management organization to get involved in activities and promote and develop activities and support activities as young persons for the development of tourism. Colleague from the Bahamas mentioned Treasure Beach, and certainly that particular project there as a community-based project, it starts simply as having local persons engage and seeing the importance of tourism and how tourism can benefit. And to get that buy-in, young persons will be very important. We know that many of our Caribbean countries, the youth, sometimes it's as much as 60% of the human resource capacity would be young persons. And so we have to find ways of engaging them to build tourism activities. I think from my experience, particularly with that Augustine project, the thing that I learned, there is no limits to what the youth or the strength of the youth can contribute to tourism. They're very motivated, they're very energetic, and we really have to harness that capacity in tourism for our sustainability and growth of our tourism sector in this region.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I share the same sentiments. They're very excellent persons to work with, and they're always very positive about engaging, and are always looking forward to new things, especially persons coming from overseas. So I totally agree with you in terms of the significant value of including young persons in anything that we do, any activity, any initiative that we do for development purposes. Jernik, it's your time, and we have a simple question for you. We'd just love to know how do you think partnerships between universities and the private sector can give you better opportunities for young persons to participate in the tourism space?
Well, being a student, I can say that as a student, you need the experience from private sector, because me myself, I started working years ago in the industry. That's you. I started working years ago in the industry, so I have more knowledge of how it works and how it's linked into each other. But there are a few fellow classmates that don't have the same experience that I do, and you can see that I'm afraid for them that when they get out in the field, they don't know how it's really like. So I'm still missing that link that, you know, you're in the industry, you're doing a bachelor degree for it, but you don't have the knowledge, the experience on floor. So I think the private sector with the school connection partnership would be perfect, because then you have the theory of it, and then you can have also the practice side of it. And then you know how to come up with new innovative ideas to make it more efficient, make it more sustainable, just to make the tourism, the whole industry itself, more fun, or let's say more fun to work in, and, you know, easier to work in, to deal with guests, and also to have a better experience. You know, if you feel well where you work, you'll also work with a happier heart, if you know what I mean. So it's a way to give the students also a chance to give their ideas on what they think, what their perspectives are in their point of view, and also the point of view of the people in the private sector to give their point of view. So if they can have that partnership to evaluate how to come with a better structure, that would be perfect for me. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir. It's amazing how things have changed in the last 6 months. Normally when someone sneezes, you know, it's no big deal.
I know what you mean.
a while ago, my response was to automatically jump out of my chair and look around to see it. Mario, we have a quick question for you. What is the role of the creative industries as a pillar of sustainable development in the Caribbean states?
Thank you. Well, cultural and creative industries can support the sustainable development by many ways. One of them is that they can decentralize, especially speaking about tourism. Here in the region, we have, for example, 21 natural and cultural heritage sites, at least in the countries that belongs to CARICOM, CARICOM, and the OECD. And for example, through the Transcultura program that works with the youth, we are rethinking how through cultural and creative industries, we can create a youth platform that through technology and digital devices can help to decentralize big groups of people in one place and making them to enjoy and to learn and to preserve these places through more social distancing ways. Also, how to enjoy from cultural experiences in its more diverse sense through new creative ways. I would like to share here for an example, and it's like we know about an initiative in which local markets has been closed, and through an online platform, the consumer can have a virtual visit through the market, look at every post of food, and choose which kind of food it wants, and order it online, and have the meal, have the food in his house while he's walking in a virtual way to the market. This kind of experiences, this kind of new ways of experience culture and tourism, we are exploring it, and I think we with the youth have ways, have new ideas to promote this more sustainable development, especially in this pandemic, in this crisis.
Final question in this particular segment, which will go to Mr. Sims. Mr. Sims, you spoke a lot about community tourism. And what I wanted to ask is, what support systems do you think governments need to give to communities for a successful community tourism initiative?
So the support systems that government need to give to develop these sectors are: one, training and education, and this is being done with the help of the Caribbean Tourism Organization and Capita Caribbean, with the development of the Caribbean Community-Based Tourism handbook, enterprise handbook, that would help to give local businesses the capacity in marketing and financing, etc., to ensure that their businesses can survive. Additionally, when we look at lending institutions, working with development banks, and also with local incubators in the Bahamas, we have the Small Business Development Unit. The incubators take entrepreneurs through prospective entrepreneurs through a rigorous process before they are giving funds. So financial assistance, capacity building, and also when it comes to infrastructure surrounding these local businesses, there's definitely needs for support in that regard. And this can definitely be seen, again, I refer back to Treasure Beach. Before Treasure Beach was hard to access, and the government in 2016, when they pumped money into this project, ensured that the infrastructure was developed for accessibility to get to these communities, ensure that they had proper understanding of how to market their product, how to use social media, etc. So giving these local communities the tools needed to be viably successful as a tourism product.
Thank you very much, Mr. Terran. So we're now at the last section of the webinar. And this is essentially where we invite the panelists to respond to questions that the audience have shared. And I see several questions here, and it may be problematic for us to be able to respond to all of them. And I'm sure the UNESCO office will find some mechanisms or some means to respond to all of them. But I think we only have time for about 2. And I see 2 critical questions here that I believe will provide an opportunity for a good thought-provoking conversation about the future of youth in the Caribbean, tourism, and the coronavirus. And one of the questions is, to what extent do you think digital technologies can play a role in encouraging a better tourism product in the Caribbean? And it's for anyone and everyone to respond to.
If I may respond, and I want to bring to light the whole conversation about open data. While the technology is going to support getting the data out there, what would be very important for resilience in terms of Caribbean tourism would be having that data in an open format where it would be machine readable and it can be used and reused to innovate tourism products and services. I think the whole open data movement across the Caribbean, of course, we have the Caribbean Open Institute, and that is led by Dr. Maurice McNaughton, the Mona campus of the University of the West Indies. And I have done some work in open data as well. It's very important that governments across the Caribbean see that the information, whether it be the tourism arrivals data, the tourism asset data, the tourism service providers, that information is made available so that the decision makers, the policy makers can have access to it. All the stakeholders, the airlines, the hoteliers, they know what is happening in various islands. The information is across the internet in that open format. There is freedom of information, and so that decisions can be made. So the technology is important, but the content of the data is also important to facilitate that decision making. And I think the open data movement across the Caribbean needs to take on that traction so that we can see the importance of it and we can see how we can contribute to building those resilient tourism destinations that we would want.
Thank you very much, Doc. Do we have anyone else? Jernik, Eleanor, Maria, or Teron? You want to put a plug in? All right, so the second question that that was asked is, given what has transpired in the last 6 months with the coronavirus pandemic, and in particular, how it has significantly affected Caribbean tourism, shouldn't this be an opportunity to pool our resources together as a Caribbean to develop one tourism product? Should this be the opportunity for us to do this now? So I'm throwing this out for persons to speak. I know Eleanor started to speak about this kind of, and Maria, about this inter-Caribbean tourism product, so to speak. So I don't know if both or anyone would want to speak.
Sure. As I said, we definitely need to be collaborating as a Caribbean, and now is definitely the time to do so. I do think that we can create one tourism product. We do have to consider that there are cultural differences between some of the islands. So we just have to take all of that into mind. I really wish that we, as a Caribbean body, could find some way to collaborate and come together and be able to do this. And as I mentioned, some of the barriers to this, such as inter-regional travel, those are things that we have to assess at a policy level and to make the changes ASAP, like now, today, so that we can be able to respond to this crisis. Before, as I said, before the window of opportunity closes, before we can no longer produce a viable product that will actually be competitive across the globe, which is really what we're trying to do. So in answer to the question, absolutely, yes, is my opinion.
I'll just like to.
Sure, go ahead.
I'd just like to add on to it. Exactly what Eleanor said, you know, developing policies where we bring down the barriers to interregional travel. And when we look at it now, people are actually, especially voters, are doing it already. We just need to capitalize on it. You know, you have sailboats that come through the Bahamas and go down to the Caribbean all the time. And we need, when we look at other examples where I call the cluster development framework works well. Look at Europe. You know, they have the Euro-Rail where you can buy a Euro-Rail pass for the month and hop from country to country. And when you do these kind of activities, develop these kind of strategies in the tourism sector with interregional travel, people tend to stay in the region longer. And more money is spent, and money is spent on a wide range. So I'm definitely moving forward. The cluster framework strategy definitely can be an advantage for the Caribbean region and encouraging interregional travel with Caribbean nationals and international travelers.
And if I may add, Chair,
sure.
I think once we get the travel, the transportation right, we will get the tourism right in the Caribbean. Of course, there are opportunities for multi-destination marketing, particularly for target markets coming from afar. They would want to spend a longer time in the Caribbean. And so movement of persons across the islands and that regional transportation mechanism, that has to be looked at carefully. I mentioned the multilateral air services agreement earlier, and I think now is the time that we really have to move forward and get those types of initiatives finalized to facilitate the movement. There are opportunities to have hoteliers, the airlines develop packages to have persons move across the region. Already several Caribbean countries, particularly the CARICOM countries, allow persons, because of our low case numbers of COVID-19, to move freely without testing. So we have certain activities already in place that will facilitate the movement. However, we need more to be done, particularly in terms of packaging and looking at the cost and the prices, looking at those taxes that persons pay on movement across borders. And not only the air aspect, but also the ferry services and the sea movement of persons. Whether it be across the Eastern Caribbean islands, we need to have more opportunities, movement of persons across our islands via sea as well, given all the health and safety measures are in place. So I think now is an opportune time to grow that particular market. There are initiatives being done by some of our interregional airlines, but I think more information perhaps need to get out to the public to say, these are the opportunities that you can embark on, and perhaps local tour operators in the various islands need to develop some of those opportunities as well and get the message out to the general public as to what is happening.
So I think that's all we may have time for today. I know there are a number of other questions that were presented, and I'm pretty much sure that Juliana will find some, as I said before, we'll find some mechanism to put it out. So my summary, based on everything I've heard, is that the coronavirus has presented an opportunity for the Caribbean to rethink, reimagine tourism, and to develop, and with the aim of developing an innovative product which has value for money, not only for the tourists, but also for the citizens of the Caribbean as well, and I mean all citizens. And possibly an integrated Caribbean tourism product may be the outcome. And we know that this has already started, so to speak, because we know that Minister Bartlett, the Minister of Tourism for Jamaica, has been actively advocating for multi-destination tourism and regional tourism, and also a regional tourism integration model for the last 2 years. And going forward, it's quite clear based on the evidence in all the Caribbean countries that this region's tourism model, or the possibility of this kind of unified model, must be experiential. It must be a learning experience. It must include exposing the Caribbean's culture and the Caribbean's heritage through the use of creative and innovative means. And community-based tourism is an avenue for this and should be looked at in this particular regard. More importantly, youth should not be left out of this discussion, of these discussions about rebuilding Caribbean tourism or enhancing or rebranding Caribbean tourism. Because as the virus itself has demonstrated, youth is essentially innovative and resilient. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again. My name is Lloyd Waller, and I'm handing over to Juliana. Juliana, yes. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I'm here. All right, thank you, Professor Waller. Thank you so much, and also dear panelists for this excellent panel, our fresh perspectives, and for the interactive discussion. I think through both of these sessions, we have really highlighted the need for collaboration, for collective wisdom, for coming together from across Caribbean small island developing states, and this at different levels, both at the community level, but also at the regional level. And we have mentioned, for example, homegrown strategies for building resilience, the need to collect better data, environmental education, also removing the barriers of entry to sciences, connecting communities, and also trying to really leave no one behind and see how we can reach out and make also vulnerable people benefit and engage them. Also in the second session, I think it was very interesting that we have been speaking also about how to create adaptive capacities in the tourism sector. And of course, I think the perspective of young people is very valuable. And as Eleanor had said, to really make young people not only a part of a discussion, but to give them the power to shape their future also in decision-making processes. And so I trust that these outcomes can really feed into the discussions on how UNESCO can better serve its small island developing states member states in this rethinking process that has started with the COVID-19 pandemic, and that UNESCO can be a platform and a laboratory of ideas. And as our director has already mentioned in the beginning, that we can make use of this as a point of departure for strengthening our partnerships in these areas, and also really strengthen our engagement with young people across the region. Having said this, I regret very much, but we have reached the end of this event, and I would like to thank you so much. Big thank you to the moderators for taking on this task, dear panelists for excellent contributions, representing many Caribbean islands from the English and Dutch speaking and Caribbean, and also our participants from Cuba. Also, thank you to Secretaries General of National Commissions for helping to identify speakers. Dear guests, thanks you for joining, and of course a special thanks to my colleague Pedro, Jailisa, Alejandro, Max, Isabel, Catherine, Katerina, David, and Latoya for their valuable advice and support in organizing this panel. Stay safe and take care. Yes? Oh.
Just a word.
Catherine, sure, go ahead.
But I let you finish, Juliana.
I'm finished now.
Yes, okay.
So I would like to invite then our director again to have some closing words.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to join you on behalf of the Cluster Office for the Caribbean, UNESCO Cluster Office for the Caribbean, in thanking the panelists and the young people that participated as well for their presentations and their thought-provoking contributions. I should also like to thank all of you for engaging us in a very, very fruitful and enriching dialogue on how to build back better. We said this phrase several times, considering the COVID-19 situation. And I'm sure that we will find ways on how to continue strengthening social and environmental resilience in Caribbean seas. And I should say also that we feel that we have achieved our objectives for this roundtable, and we certainly look forward to continue this very important dialogue. But above all, as Juliana said, to transform these very important reflections and debate in concrete actions to accompany our member states in making Caribbean seas move forward in the 2030 agenda. So thank you very much to all of you. Thanks. Over.
All right. Thanks.